Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith. Today we're going to be talking about something that I've been asked about a lot lately, and this is something I've been meaning to make a video about for years. That is how to do tethered shooting with Sony's latest camera models. Now, depending on what I'm doing, that's going to kind of affect my methodology. Am I going to use a USB connection? Am I going to use a wireless connection? What software am I going to use? All this varies depending on my specific use case scenario. So this is going to be a little bit longer video. Check out the timestamps in the description below if you'd like to skip to a specific spot. But I wanted to not only give you guys a nice setup tutorial, but I wanted to speak about some different scenarios in which I would use all the different methods and kind of make this a more practical, real world kind of video. Anyways guys, we won't make this longer than it has to be. Let's go ahead and get into this. Taking a closer look at things here on the computer, there's going to be two main programs we can use to do tethering with the Sony camera. There is the free download, which is called Sony Imaging Edge Desktop. This is available for a Mac or Windows machine. I will put a link to this in the description below. We can also use something like Capture One, which I'll speak about in just a moment. Now, which of these programs I use depends on what my goal is with my tethering. Usually these days, the main thing that I'm looking to do with tethering is to be able to just have some images on the computer that I can preview and have a closer look at. This is great for doing things like business headshots. So I want to be able to see exactly which photos look best to the client. I want them to be able to see on a larger screen as well. And it saves me a ton of time because I always told people, during a business headshot session, I always say, okay, we're going to take, we may take, 50 or 60 images, but we're going to know exactly which ones you like the most whenever we leave here. And that way it saves a ton of time and eliminates a lot of confusion. So for that, all we need to do is have JPEG files on the computer because we're just getting a preview. Now, if I'm in a situation where I want to actually be able to do something more creative and perhaps go in and start to actually do a little bit of editing on images while I'm shooting, that's where I want to have raw files on the computer. And that's where I will go to Capture One. And for that type of setup, I will also use a Tether cable because transferring raw files wirelessly, it takes too long still. Even on the latest cameras, it takes 5, 6, 7 seconds. So a cable is better for that. So I'm going to show you guys how to do both these types of setups with both software programs. We're going to start off with the common setup using something like the Sony software, and I'm going to show you how to do this wirelessly using the A1. Now, if you have a camera, like for example any of the current Sony cameras, A7S III, A1, A7 IV, A7RIV, your setup is going to look just like this. It'll even look the same if you have a cinema-centric camera in Sony's lineup, like for example the FX30 or the FX3. And I'm going to even stick my neck out and say, even though this camera doesn't exist yet, I would imagine that the A9 Mark III, whenever it finally debuts, will be the same setup as this too. If you have an older Sony camera, like an A9 Mark II or an A7R IV, both those cameras can do this same setup we described too, but the menu setup is going to just look a little different. Okay, so let's see here. Let's go ahead and do this wireless setup. So right now I have this A1 set up just as it would be set up if I was actually on a real shoot. Remember, we're just sending JPEG files to the computer. And so a lot of times if I'm shooting tethered with a cable, I will actually, just have the camera save a raw file internally to the card, and then we have a raw file on the computer, and that gives me my 2 raw backups. But this doesn't give you a raw file on the computer, so I actually have 2 memory cards in this camera. That way I can have the raw file saved in both places, and then the JPEG is going to the computer. So to set all this up, right now this camera, the main thing that you want to do first, if we go in here and we look at our network settings, the main thing that we notice here is that there's going to be many different options in here. Now, one big thing I can tell you guys that will mess you up if you're not careful is the smartphone connection. You want to make sure that this smartphone connection is turned off. If this is not turned off, you will embarrass yourself in front of your client because it will not want to enable the wireless tethering option. So make sure that's all first and foremost. Then you go down here to the transfer and remote, and under PC remote function, there is an option here that simply says on and off. Now, right now it's set to USB. The USB connection basically works pretty much just like everything that I am going to tell you here, except whenever you have the USB cable plugged in, the camera is going to be immediately detected, and there's nothing else to do. And it just works out just like that. Everything else is the same setup. On the USB connection, before I talk to you about the wireless, I will mention on the USB connection, there is going to be a couple special things we want to do on that. I'll just go ahead and briefly show you. If you're shooting tethered, it's very likely that you're going to be in the field and using a laptop computer. You may not have it connected to power. You want to go ahead and make sure that you turn off your wireless power supply. So down here in the setup menu under USB, there's an option that says USB, well, not wireless power supply, but USB power supply. There's an option that says USB power supply. You want this to be turned off, because if you have a tether cable plugged in and your laptop will basically be used to charge your camera battery. It will drain your laptop in no time, and you'll be there wondering what happened. Ask me how I know. So if you use the USB connection, be sure to turn that off. But otherwise, this entire setup process is going to be the same with the USB connection. And you'll notice on my camera here under the My menu, I do have an option in here for USB power supply, so I can quickly get to that and turn it on and off as needed. Okay, pardon the tangent. I'll go right back over to where we were, and we will resume things in a wireless function. So if we go in here and switch this over here, we'll notice that we can turn on some different options. There's two Wi-Fi options. Long story short, you want to use the Wi-Fi direct option. This Wi-Fi access point is essentially an infrastructure type of setup, where your camera is connected to a Wi-Fi network and your laptop is connected to a Wi-Fi network, and then they both have to kind of find each other. I've noticed that that's much slower. Furthermore, if you're going to be out at someone's business or just out in the field in general somewhere, you're probably not going to have access to a Wi-Fi network. So it's better to just have a local network between your computer and your camera. So for that, we go to Wi-Fi direct. Okay, so it does this. It tells us that we can go in here and finalize some other details of the connection under the Wi-Fi direct info option. So that's cool. We'll do this. And now we can kind of scroll down. And so you'll see some other options in here. Now, right now, it says save image destination. As I mentioned before, we are saving to the memory card as well as to the computer. And so you can see we have this option here. You can do camera only or PC only if you prefer to. But for my workflow, I like PC and camera. And then down here, there is an option for RAW and JPEG save image. Now, I've purposely left one part of this camera incorrectly configured, so that way you can see that this option is not available to us. But this is the option that allows us to be able to go in and have a RAW file and a JPEG file on the camera card, but just a JPEG on the computer. And so this won't let me do this. And it will give you this message. And we're getting this message because the camera is just set to RAW right now, but it doesn't make it immediately obvious what you should do here. Well, what you should do here is you should set the camera to RAW and JPEG. So we're going to kind of back out of this for a moment. We're going to go over to our image quality settings, and we are going to change the camera over to RAW and JPEG. Sorry, which is not that one, it's this one. So we'll change it off RAW. We're going to put it onto RAW and JPEG, just like this. Now on my camera, I have all these options under my function menu. So I can quickly go in here and change my image quality. So you can see I have a shortcut to that here. And I have a shortcut to my card slot set up, my record media settings here as well. So this is a much faster way of getting around. Okay, but we are on RAW and JPEG right now. And as I mentioned, I also have it set to simultaneous recording. So we're doing RAW and JPEG files of both cards. That way, again, I'm able to have RAW files in two different locations, because remember, they're not going to the computer. If we were shooting with a cable, I would not have it set up this way, because we would have a RAW file on the memory card and a RAW file on the computer. All right, so go back in here. PC remote function. And now when we scroll down, because we're on RAW and JPEG, we have another option available to us. It's no longer grayed out. And you can see that we do have it set up to where it's just putting our JPEG files on the computer. And that's what we want, because those JPEGs will wirelessly transfer very fast. Okie dokie. Now we'll come up here and we'll actually turn the PC remote function on like this. And you can see Wi-Fi Direct is selected. Everything else is all set up here. And now where it says Wi-Fi Direct Info, when I hit this button, it gives us the SSID as well as the password. And let's see, let's take a look at things on our computer here. Okay, so before I even open up the Sony Imaging Edge software, I'm going to go over here to my Wi-Fi settings and no doubt see all my neighbors' Wi-Fi devices, but you can see there is my Sony A1. So we're going to click on it. Okay, now let's look at the camera here and see what's happening. Okay, so the camera should be ready to go. Everything is all configured here. And it's very important that you do this before you open up the Sony software. Now, I have this software already installed, so I have a little shortcut to it up here. So when I click here, it opens up and we have an option here that says remote. We want to go ahead and click on remote like this. And this window right here is going to come up. Now, if you don't have the camera connected already, you're just going to get an error message here and it'll close. So that's why you want to make the Wi-Fi connection first to the camera. And now you can see that it gives us an option here in our box. All we have to do is double click on it. And voila, as some would say, it is now connected. Okay. And you can see we actually have the live view going right now. Okay, so everything is active there. Now, sometimes what I would do with this is I will have this set up to where I use multiple desktops on my Mac, and I'll have the live view on one of my desktops, and I'll have the actual viewer open on another desktop. It does slightly slow down the transfer if you have the live view active, but it's still still works relatively fast. We can turn the live view on and off here. I may give you guys a longer tutorial of how this software works. There's a grid you can put up, which I use a lot for architecture. I've had architects looking over my shoulder and they're like, is that level? And I'm like, well, let me show you, and I'll bring up this grid and I'll often go in here and put a tighter grid on there and customize the color and so forth. So there's all these different options here, and you can actually go in here and tap and focus in different spots, which is pretty cool as well. So I can actually tap, I can click in different areas here on my screen and have it focus in different spots, which is pretty cool. But for the purpose of doing business headshots, I don't use this. This again is more of an architectural thing or product photography thing. So we'll turn the live view off for now. So going back here to our camera, you guys can see I still have full control over it. Okay, so if I do this, if I take a picture of something, you can see it's going to go ahead and transfer. It's going to actually pop up on the computer. As soon as you take the first image, the viewer app will then open up. So you guys can see how that viewer app opened for me. So there's our image. Okay, so that works out really, really well there. Really nice and easy setup. Easy peasy, Shows you a little behind the scenes look at me filming the video here. So works very, very well. And we have all of our JPEGs on the computer. And if we go back to the camera, there's another camera manufacturer I've been talking to recently about how their tethering works. And I've been saying, hey, you guys need to change this, because on Sony, it's possible to go in here and have a wireless tether active, and I can come back and I can still review my images on the camera. So if I've got my client looking at the images on the screen, I don't want to oftentimes I don't want to zoom in, to my client's pores on my main laptop screen so they can, have their self-confidence destroyed. I just like to get an overall look of the image on the computer. And then if I want to zoom in and check critical focus or something, then I can still be looking at the playback on my camera, and I can zoom in and look at those details on the camera separate from the client, which is pretty awesome. I can do my separate rating here as well in the camera. And I can still do rating in the software too and have those files tagged differently if I want. So I have a lot of flexibility in how this can work. It's very, very nice setup. So anyways, that's generally how this works out. If I wanted to have these raw files onto the computer, everything would be the exact same. I would just plug in a Tether cable instead, and the raw files would be firing across just as fast as these JPEGs are going across wirelessly. You guys can see that I'm doing a little burst shooting here. I fired about 16 frames. Probably a little bit excessive on my part, but you guys can see how they are coming on across on the computer right now. So it works pretty fast. I've used this connection up to about 30 feet away, even with obstructions, and the dual multiple input, multiple output antennas in the A1 do really well. It does very, very good. It's a very reliable connection. So that's how this works out. But yeah, if we use the cable, it's going to be the same process. Whenever we open up the Sony software, it's just going to detect the camera as a cabled connection as opposed to an IP connection, and we would double click it and it would just do its thing from there. If we were going to do the same thing with Capture One, I'll just kind of briefly show you. I'm going to close down the Sony software. With Capture One, it would be the exact same. We would just basically have the Wi-Fi connection to the camera made already. And whenever we open up Capture One, okay, so here we are in Capture One. Whenever we go in here, if we go over to the option that says Tether, you can see that. So right now it knows that there's no camera connected. Okay, we still have our Wi-Fi connection to our camera, which is good. Okay, whenever I go here to camera, you can see it says select camera. If I select this, because we have that Wi-Fi enabled and that connection made to our camera, all I have to do is come down here and select it. And then voila, once again, here we are in Capture One shooting Tethered now. And the same exact settings that we did in the Sony software, the same settings that we saw apply as far as having just the JPEGs go over. All that stuff we set in the camera, it's still going to hold here in Capture One as well. So you guys can see that it's the same exact process. Same thing. So they come over very, very quickly. Nice and easy, just like that. So pretty good setup. It's not bad. It works really, really well. I don't know why anyone would want to use any of the third-party external wireless devices these days. I mean, this solution works so well in the camera. Really nice setup. Take a quick pic of my lamp there. So yeah, works very, very well. And again, if I was using Capture One, I usually use Capture One if I'm using a cable and I want those raw files to be on the computer and I want to do some edits while I'm actually shooting. That's where I would go in and actually just go right over and plug my Tether cable in. We would want to go ahead and make sure that the Tether option was set to USB, and it would automatically detect, and all works out well from there. One other thing I'll point out briefly is that we can still have our live view in Capture One as well. There's a weird picture of me as the camera is sitting here on the table. But yeah, we can go in here to Capture One. We can control all these things wirelessly too. You can control your autofocus, all of your settings, and of course fire the camera. It works extremely, extremely well. So anyways, guys, I know this was a bit of a long one. Check out the description because I will put some little timestamps in there for you guys, and that'll make it easy to navigate. If you guys have technical difficulties or any other questions, just write me in the description below. As new Sony cameras come out, I will update this video. That's why this one is labeled 2023. And definitely be sure to subscribe for future videos. And certainly if you have questions, oftentimes people's questions end up turning into other videos. So don't be shy about writing those comments, Even if I don't respond, I do read all my comments. Thank you guys for your time today. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, signing off.